welcome back to this channel. In this session, I'm gonna talk about Dtype. Let's go! In this Pandas session, we are gonna talk about the Dtype and some related function to the Dtype, such as select Dtype and convert Dtype. As you remember, in the previous session, we talked about the shape and some related function to the shape. You can check this video here, of course. Let's jump into coding. At first, I need to import my required libraries, such as Pandas and NumPy, and then it's good to create a data frame here. I said df pandas.dataframe, and I create the first row with salary. For example, just a random number, and also the other column with, for example, the number, just a random number, and the other column, for example, with name. I can use, for example, Jack, John, and for example Julie, all of them with J. And the other one, for example, is enter, and I said true, false, and true. So I create a data frame with different kind of dtypes. Let's print our data frame and run it. As you can see, all of them is created very well. Let's go talk about the dtype of this kind of data frame. I said df.dtypes, and as you can see, the salary is a float just because of this point here. For example, if this number will be 0, or just I deleted, you can see the dtype is float as well, just because of this point. The number is an integer because all of them are integer, and the name is an object. As you can see, it is a string. The object usually refers to a string, to the integer, float, or the mix of different kind of database. And the enter, as you can see, it is a boolean because it is a true false. What does it mean by different kind of dtypes? For example, if I create a series here, I said s1, for example, pandas.series, and I said, for example, I don't know, 12, 15, and something like new. And if I print s1, and as you can see, the dtype is object because it is a different kind of dtype here, and it is like a mix. If I remove this dtype and just enter, for example, 16, it turned into the integer. And as you remember, just by this point, it turned into the float. Even all the small number is 0, okay? Let's talk about the select dtype. What does it mean by select dtype? Let me print our df here. For example, I want to just select columns with integer, and you imagine that this data frame has maybe 100 columns, so it is very difficult to find out which one is the integer and just write its name and say, for example, give me salary, this column, this column, this column, and it could be very difficult. So I can just select them by dtype, and I said, for example, df.select dtype, and I said, for example, include I don't know, maybe float, and it gives me the float column. But if I want, for example, give float, integer, boolean, so I can put it into the bracket and, for example, added something like, for example, int 64, and as you can see, I get a float and integer column, okay? For example, I want to add here something like, for example, I don't know, boolean, and I get a float, integer, boolean. But instead of actually adding data into the include, I can just exclude by using, and I said, for example, instead of include, I said exclude. Instead of just writing too many D types, I can just exclude it, for example, the object one. And as you can see, the result is the same, but I write just object here, but in include, I have to write float, integer, and the boolean. So this is what we can done with select dtype. But what about the convert dtype? Let me at first I create another data frame because I want to assign dtypes to each column. So I said pandas.dataframe, and for example, I said the column A I created with a series, pandas.series, and for example, I said 12.5, 18, and 19. And I want to assign a dtype here. I set it empty, and then I will be complete later. I set the B, for example, here, pandas.series, and I create something with a string BBAA and, for example, CC, and I set it as a dtype. Let me talk about the dtype as well. We have a different kind of dtype. One of them is the best, one of them is a true, and the other one is the false. Okay, what am I mean by the false? It is clear that it means this data type is a wrong. What am I mean by a true? It means that it is the true, it is not the false, but it is not the best one. For example, here the dtype is a float because of this point, but if I for example here set integer, it is not the false. Or if it is for example integer, it can be float, but the integer is the best one. I mean, float is a true, but it is not the best. What about here? The object, it's a true one, but it is not the best. But what about the false? For example, the integer is the false. I mean that if I run data frame 3, I get an error because it said that AA is not integer. So the dtype integer is wrong here. But if I set the object, it can be true, but it is not the best. So let me print df3, and then here I said df3 convert dtypes. I just want to convert all dtypes from the true to the best, and I pass it into a df4. And if I get df4.dtype, we can see that this float from the true turned into the best one, into the integer 4, and the object from the true dtypes turned into the best one as a string. This is all about the dtypes. So you have to know about the data frame and series. If you have a question, please comment below. Give me a thumbs up and a like. Watch the next video, and bye bye.